So we're going to start tonight with Judy Halebsky, and we have applause already. And Judy is the author of two poetry collections, Tree Line and Sky Equals Empty, and they're both out from New Issues, which is a wonderful press. And Sky Equals Empty was also a finalist for the California Book Award. And her chapbook, Space, Gap, Interval, Distance, won the Poets Under 40 Award from 16 Rivers Press. Oh, and I forgot to mention that one of the reasons I invited Judy and Gillian together tonight, and a reason I hoped that Rusty would be able to come, is that I want to start featuring some poets whose books are published by some of our local presses. And so tonight we have representatives from 16 Rivers, and then also Rusty Morrison is actually the owner and operator and driving force behind Omnidon. Okay, so Judy has poems published or forthcoming in Ziziva, Field, the Antioch Review, Hotel America, Smartish Pace, and others. And she went to Japan and lived for 5 years on a fellowship from the Japanese Ministry of Culture. And the MacDowell Colony, the Malay Colony, and the Canada Council for the Arts have supported her work. She chairs the Department of Literature and Language at Dominican University of California. And she was originally from Halifax, Nova Scotia, and she now lives in Oakland. Please welcome Judy.
Let me try to just fix that a little bit, because it's just a little awkward. There.
How about that? How about that?
Okay, hello.
No, I'm great. Nice to be here. Nice to see so many familiar faces. Thank you all for coming. I am delighted to read here at the Marin Poetry Center. I have always enjoyed attending these events, and now I'm on this side of the microphone. I'll do my best. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to read tonight from my most recent collection, and I'm going to read some older work and some newer work. And I'll start with this poem called Out of the Gate. But first, I want us to think about a little haiku by Isa, who spells his name One Cup of Tea. And he has this little haiku about the snail, and it says, "Inch by inch, climbing Mount Fuji." But the snail doesn't know if it's climbing Mount Fuji or just a little lump on the ground. So we can wonder if that's like us. Out of the gate. I have breathed into too many balloons, put my fingers in so many cakes, had my body scanned with fingerprints, written out my dreams and lines of the night, traced words into storm clouds, mixed water with mint and bourbon, made a bed of spidering vines, wore a wreath of grass cuttings, a raft of stick seed. There's a snail who thinks he's climbing Mount Fuji. The racetrack is filled with stars. This is a letter poem that I wrote to an oceanography professor. It's called Dear Dr. Mossman. Your class began with waves and a yellow bus field trip to the ocean. It was September and already way too cold for me to get in. We threw a tennis ball into the water. There was a worksheet. We were supposed to use the ball to count the waves. This was impossible. How do we start counting? I wrote infinity. Mom was just starting chemotherapy. I would get her movies and ice cream. I read the textbook at the kitchen table with its clean, distinct paragraphs that I could read over and over again. I'm writing a poem today about water, its 4 states of matter, which, as you know, aren't states but phases because they change. We think of water as having 3 states, ice, water, and steam. But there's one more in the deep sea vents where the force of all the water compresses and makes something that's both water and steam. It's called Supercritical Water, which might work in my poem. It's about forgiveness, about the heart, as both flawed love and a muscle. So I think I'll be able to work in supercritical, where something we thought not possible happens in a place we'll never see. I live on the other coast now with my boyfriend. He says the waves move through the water, that the water stays in place, that the energy is moving, not the water. I'm putting it together at a 16-year interval. My mother survived because she wouldn't listen, because statistics are just numbers, because the ocean is colder than zero. I hope you got better students who knew something about the ocean. I hope they won't find mistakes in these poems. The ocean, the Bay of Fundy, the tidal bore, the sky. I'm an unreliable source. I'm using oceanography to try to understand if I should get married, if I should listen, if I should swim out with a tennis ball and count the waves. When I was preparing to read tonight, I came across this poem series I wrote when I first moved to Davis, California. Well, I wrote some of it in Japan, and it was, I finished it when I moved to Davis. And I wrote these poems after seeing a play called Copenhagen, which is about kind of Niels Bohr and the Second World War and the atomic bomb. And that got me on a reading kick, and I wrote these poems. The first one has a title, Mom Says Stalin Was a Bad Communist, which is kind of a joke. But to me, it also echoes the legends I grew up with, where my mother was always trying to tell me which were the good communists and which were the bad communists. Mom says Stalin was a bad communist. They get me to climb to high branches, to drop the apples down. Thanksgiving in the valley and rows of trees. Daddy bites off, then spits out the bad spots of my apple and hands it back to me. 1941. The ceilings were low, the apartments crowded. Grandmother pulls on her heavy skirt, pushes out the wrinkles. Men wear button-down shirts and shake hands and put their arms around each other. Everyone comes over to eat and visit, and there's all this talking, mostly about things I don't know, like Spain and Stalin and the Army Corps of Engineers. Daddy got into Bronx science. He knows how to measure and how to weigh small things, like a sperm and egg, mist on the window, or a breath of air. Grandmother sews sequins on dresses. 1911, the ceilings were low, the apartments crowded. They could only get one child on the boat. Grandmother's sister Bella, the oldest, was supposed to go. But she got scared, or maybe she fell in love. Maybe she didn't understand that the days were piling up, that the days were leaning together, that it would get worse. Eve got married, and I walked down the aisle dropping flowers. Grandmother sewing sequins on dresses, one by one by one. They're looking and looking, but it's too small to see, so they guess and guess again. What's inside an atom, and what's it going to take to split it in half and in half again? Heavy water, uranium, a handful of tenured professors, train trips, relativity, cigarettes. My father in a lab coat at City College, measuring the distance from here to Cuba in strokes. Notes on why. They were trying to make a bomb, and they had this guy Heisenberg who understood uncertainty and particles and the chances of what would move where. This was after relativity, where light bends around a door, and things that seem to happen at the exact same time actually happen at different times. Nagasaki depends on the angle, on how you measure. Manchuria, soldiers, civilians, and God. Dear Jesse, I'm trying to calculate the chances, measure him out in probability, but it's not looking good. There's an infinite number of things that can happen, and no one knows why, out of all the options, only one gets pinned down into the present moment. And on top of that, being together at the same space in time and location depends on where you're looking from. And it gets worse because time changes with how fast you travel. So you might feel like it was a week ago, but the same week for him could be 3 years, and by now he's woken up without you almost 1,000 times. Tree ghost echo. Across from Carl's Jr. at 5th and Covell, there's a huge old tree in an empty lot on my way to school. While the BBC translates, while satellites measure, while troops are moving, while lives are counted out into matching piles, and brides in Sacramento try on dresses, white and a size too small, I am looking at this tree. So I write a lot from haiku, Matsuo Basho's work, and the more I read Basho and kind of understand the references in his work, the more it pulls me further back into the influences that inform Basho. And he really wrote in close dialogue with so many poems by Defe and Li Po, or you might say Li Bai in a more contemporary translation. So now those two characters are with me in these poems. And this is a relatively new poem, and it's called Fire Season with Defe and Li Po. They come with letters they want me to deliver. Do you want stamps? Or you could use my computer, I smile. They look at each other. Defe wrinkles his brow. He asks again for a song, for Arlo Guthrie, for these mountains, this year without snow or rain. The town's making a fire break, clearing trees and brush down to the soil. A road, a river, a path, something the fire can't cross. There are no names, no addresses on the letters. So I write them into stories and send them out across roofs, low houses, tree lines, and highways. There are wildflower seeds that open only in fire. They've been waiting. Pull up a chair, Defe, a glass, Li Po. Let's drink here for the sugar pine, taller and older than all of us. And I have a Dominican English major here with us tonight, and I'm going to read a poem for her. Nice to see you, Janet. This is a poem I wrote from one of Basho's haiku. You know, the one with the frog jumping that everyone's translated? Okay, yeah. We're on the same page here. It's called A Breaking Word. There's that part after Basho writes, Old Still Pond, a pressing a fingerprint into wet clay, where the word Ya holds a space in the air. A cloud changes shape in the sky. Make it a dash, a murmur, a breath on the inhale. This old pond, so many have tried to open. A sigh, a hum, a frog jumps in. Sound of water, says Haas. Plop, says Watts. Kerplunk, says Ginsberg. When I was at McDowell, I had the opportunity to go and visit Emily Dickinson's house. And I got this tour with this woman who had such wonderful insights into Emily Dickinson's life. And she had all these stories about her daily life and this game she would play with her, with the kids, her nieces and nephews, where they would like call up to her window and she would put down a basket and they would bring her treasures like pine cones and she would put baked goods in the basket for them. But the most meaningful thing that I learned on that tour, this tour guide was really adamant that we think of Emily Dickinson as depressed and reclusive. But that in the years, there were times when she was depressed, but the years when she was most productive as a poet were also the years she was most engaged with the world and in good spirits. Which seemed to me an important message for not only caring for ourselves, but also that I think poetry can be something that actually makes our lives better and is kind of an emotional nourishment for us. So I'll read this poem, and it has a phrase that's written with Japanese readings of Chinese characters, and I'll give first the literal translation and then how they might read as a phrase. A thread for a nest, a word for a vein. She is sending cupcakes out the window in a basket tied with string, Frida stacking flowers in her hair, Aunt Nina scrubbing blouses back to white, Emily sending poems out in letters, in the needle hem of a dress. She is trading pine cones for cookies, feathers for scones, carve heart, set bone, carefully polishing a poem. It was later when all she could muster was to sit at the top of the stairs while her sister played piano below. It was after her nephew died, so many bottles into the sea. I have followed nights in moss on the north side of trees. So this next poem is called Bristlecomb Pine, and it integrates translations of two of Basho's haiku with some other kind of found material that I've dug up about the natural world. It's widely available on the internet. Bristlecomb Pine. Mission blue butterflies lay their eggs in lupin, monarchs in milkweed. They migrate 2,400 miles from the high mountains of Mexico to here. They travel in months and years. They live for 6 weeks. Mom says, one lifetime isn't enough. Feed me a broth of chanterelles. Make me forget with snowmelt and fireweed. Butterflies can barely see, so they flutter toward any movement. Even a long day is not enough singing for skylarks. Remember, by the time they come back, it's 5 generations later. Pupa, Latin for doll, between a caterpillar and a butterfly. Remember, skylarks only sing while flying. Remember, each tree has a name. Bristlecone pine live for 1,000 years, unless there's fire or disease or people nearby. Sugar pine is named for the sweet gum that collects on its trunk as a way to heal a wound. A butterfly sanctuary isn't for butterflies, it's for milkweed and lupin. Over the field, clinging to nothing, a skylark sings. I'll read one last poem. What do I want to say about it? This is another Li Po poem, and this is the kind of pivot poem that brings me from my current work in Treeline to the new work I'm doing in a manuscript I'm developing called The Sky of Wu. And so one of the things that I have discovered reading more about Basho is he's writing in conversation with these other poets. And I like that idea that these earlier poets are kind of with us. So, Li Po loved 2 things. Li Po loved 2 things, waterfalls and drinking. When the emperor summoned him, he was drunk in a bar. Li Po wrote back, "Excuse me from your court today. I am a drunken hermit. Worn like these stones, water rushes past me. Branches and trunks form dams, the leaning together houses, the fish stalks disappearing, a tree standing still in the flooded creek. I left because there were whole towns without work. Houses worth less than the water heater. Fishing hamlets without roads, houses clustered around the docks, docks clustered around the fish houses. We were a generation that shipped out. There are 1,000 songs about us, sung by those who stayed. The news says they've found growing numbers of cod. To me now, the stocks are still down. 20 years dropping, and 20 years when not one boat went out. It's not that they're again, it's just that they might. And my laced-armed friends, my Mooseland woods, could we come back? Could they stitch us into the salt air, the wind-bent pines, a kitchen table, a mist-damp coat, the lingering blue dusk? Are they counting us? If this is the middle path, if I had to fight, if I were called to court, I'd fight with sticks, with ice-cold water, with direct sunlight, with reckless wind-spun seeds, the outer edge of a kite tail, the fairgrounds, the spinning teacups, if I had to pick two things to love. Basho looking down over the falls, in another country, hundreds of years later, picking flowers for Lipo. Fish don't have ears, but they make love songs to find other fish. Water is 800 times more dense than air. The body of a fish is as dense as water. Fish don't hear sound waves, they absorb them. Thanks very much.
Rusty, do you want to use this?
I do. I'm going to leave. Okay. You did really well.
Just try to get this a little bit.
A little bit. Thank you. Thank you, Judy. That was delightful. That last poem I love. I was so hoping you'd read it. Okay, so next up is Rusty Morrison. So Rusty is a poet, a critic, and a publisher. And she was a teacher for 19 years before earning her MFA from St. Mary's College of California. She's a wonderful teacher. I can attest to that. Her first book, Weathering, won the Colorado Prize for Poetry. Her second book, The True Keeps Calm, Biding Its Story, won a Sawtooth Poetry Prize, a James Laughlin Award, a Northern California Book Award, and a D. Castagnola Award from the Poetry Society of America. And her other works include After Urgency, which won the Dorset Prize, Book of the Given, and Beyond the Chain Link. Known for her innovative use and reuse of form and line, Morrison has been praised for, in the words of Brian Tier, I love this quote, the way she pairs lyrics' mimesis of interiority with philosophy's relentless self-scrutiny. And in 2001, Morrison and her husband, Ken Keegan, founded Omnidon Publishing in Richmond. Please welcome Rusty Morrison.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you, Francesca, for inviting me. I love Judy's work. It's so exciting to read with her and hear the new book poems. I love the earlier book. And it's really an honor to read here at Falkirk for the Marin Poetry Society. There's so much energy of attention in this room. I can really feel it. And so it's a very special gift and serious demand to read for such accomplished writers and serious writers. So I'll do my best to be present for you and for everyone the energy in this room, I mean, it's really powerful. So it's an honor to be here. A couple of my books are on the table over there. I also brought Gillian Connolly's book in case you wanted to take a look at it, since I'm pinch hitting for her, and she's an amazing writer. And a dear friend. So she's a really wonderful person. So I decided to make this really useful for me, and I'm reading all new work from a new long series. A couple of the poems were recently published in Boston Review, so I'll start with those because that'll kind of make me feel safe, and then I'll sort of make my way into the... this is a very tightly constrained form. You'll see if you look at my poems that usually I'm working in some kind of formal constraint. Not maybe an intense constraint, but form is really important to me. Anne Lauterbach says that the convergence of subject matter is released by form. And so it's really through the form that, at least for me, subject matter coheres and congeals. So, and this is probably the most intense formal constraint I've worked in, which is 7-syllable segments with no punctuation, with a space between them, 3 segments per line, couplets, and then a single line with a single syllable at the end. And it's really tough to come up with the single syllable at the end after a few of them, you know. And I wanted a series, I wanted to work in a constraint that would allow me to actually live in the work inside the experience of constraint that I feel in my life. And not only because of physical demands and financial demands, but also because we live in an environment that is frighteningly in crisis, both politically, you know, ecologically. There's so many constraints, and I am so afraid that I am not up to the challenge of sometimes getting up in the morning. So doing the work in these tightly constrained forms, and then something shifts, and I can actually figure out something that works, makes me feel alive and hopeful. So someone said, speaking to the choir when Judy was saying we work in the poems, I don't know who it was over here, but it, you know, I just thought, yeah, this is the room to really talk about what writing does for us and how it, at least for me, it makes it possible to get up the next morning. And so working in these crazy little constraints. So now you're going to hear some of the crazy little constraints. So you rub the just picked poppy petal between your thumb and first finger until orange is your prisoner. Just like squeezing yourself between one politic act and the next, leaving trace color only. Hard even to recognize as an adaptation. You once thought would breed safety. A compressed petal isn't pretty. Why is pressure your preoccupation, kept as your companion mechanism? You have sex under tight sheets just to feel how skin is such a thin containment for what's dispossessed inside you. As the sheets also so easily give way, orphaned in air. Sometimes you close your eyes, spit over the side of the world, any world, and the moisture on your husband's face that you find weeks later isn't tears, but finer in texture. The way steam is a mirror of what bodies are, just heat and surrender. You are excess, but won't know even as you feel yourself turn into pure static, but sweetly pungent, I hope, as heated tar. So maybe you can hear the segments. Some of these have titles, these two don't. They're under the subtitle, the larger title of Want. And I'm not sure when I actually end up with a whole bunch of them, if that's going to be the title of the manuscript, because it seems like in some ways such a kind of a simple title, but it's really where the series started from, so we'll see. Stay tuned. And the ones that don't have titles just come out under Want. So this is another Want. Here news anchors, then the bank clerks, Adopt an accent. It's the next popular speech tactic. It arrives inarguably. Now it's personally yours. Power penetrates bodies, says Foucault, to govern from inside mostly, soundlessly. You will soon hear us all used as history's peculiar alliance, built simply of its passage, plus some friction caused by the indefinite articles that any new deception drags with it. Did you think words were a way to police yourself? Syllables could be tamed by your counting them? Thought you'd tempt what Keats left light-winged in some melodious plot to befriend your failure to be more than fugitive in the shadows numberless. You can't just form subversive songbirds harmonically transmitting "Thou wast not born for death" along the latest fiber optics to voice an instantaneousness that'd kin you to others in this brokenness. To write what you don't know as if lyric could hear it. So that's my ode to Keats, who I return to constantly. And I can't tell you what work it was to get some of my favorite quotes into this poem. This poem was like months, put it here, it won't work, put it there, and then the 7-syllable thing wouldn't work. And I was really tempted to put a hyphen in and break melodious, because I couldn't get it to work in its little packet. But then finally, I changed everything about the last part of the poem, and I actually liked it, and melodious fit in its little packet, so that was kind of like... I also got the idea to put in this poem the fact that I'm constantly counting syllables, which came to me while I was struggling and couldn't get melodious in, so that was kind of like magical, and it worked, so that was like, stop working on this poem. And some of these are right now titled "Everyone is Noah," and this is one of them, and that's a quote from Blanchot. No wild poppies in your weeds this season, just a cellular exhaustion-style watching as death's margin creeps closer. Try the new hair gel to stiffen up against worse damage. Now you hide beginnings behind sunglasses, scared by frenzied high notes that you used to let blind you, that Coltrane played over and over, the surf freezing, and still you used to dive between your yearnings until the vinyl records scratch. Ran the tire too fast against the curb, drenched in unredeemed excesses, fine madness. Blake saw nature has no outline, but imagination has. Superfluid tactics to blur every limit it makes of you. So you'll find that not too many of the ones I'm going to read tonight have quotes in them because I get tired of doing this. But and this is another one of those poems that I was really struggling with, and I write early in the morning, and the evening before, when I was in the midst of this not working, I was rushing to get home, and I ran right up against the curb so loud that actually my husband heard it from in the house and came out. It was like, so the next morning all I could think about was how bad it was that I rubbed up against the curb, but got it in the poem, so who cares about the alignment? My husband does, but so another "Everyone is Noah." What if water? This is for you, Judy. For I love that poem about another kind of water. What if water were the pure form of initiation? Its influence exerted through rain's limpid medium, Or is it steeped in hot bath water, lulled neurons shift their secret guises open, wherever fog condenses on your skin, rippling gravitational fields that you thought were your hands, that should not dry out or disappear in exposure to full sun or waver, transparent, if you reach for dusk's mimic of thick consciousness. Just moisten with a fine brushstroke to make white lilies rise and float on mind's dark pond. Now crouch near its banks. To distract is to allow this corrosion on all you keep, which is kind of my method of operation, which you probably know. Distract myself is kind of one of the things I teach. Distract yourself from what you think you're doing, and then things will work out. And so I was really, I was like scared to actually put that in the poem. At the end of the poem, where you're not supposed to have like the answer, but I couldn't stop myself from doing that. So even though my point is to distract myself from what I think is true, since I think that's so true, I used it as the truth and put it at the end of the poem. So now you know how embarrassing that poem really is. The secrets come out, right, when you're reading. So this is a poem that I wrote when I was in New York with Ken, my husband. We go once a year to do a big reading for Omnidon, and we're always rushing around, and there's never enough time to get everything done, and we're always getting a little lost on the subway and taking our books and showing them to reviewers and trying to get somebody to pay attention to our little press. And so it's kind of like massively stressful and exciting. And I had this experience. My father died a few years ago, and I had a complicated relationship with him. Some of that's in some of my books. But I suddenly had this feeling that some of the homeless people, when they looked up at me, it's my father's expression. And I really felt that, like, in the subway a few times. And it was like intensely moving and scary, and I didn't know how to put it in in language in the work. So it's kind of in this poem in a drifty way. So this one has a title. It's called The Comeback. Handout dollar ready in your pocket. Subway rush hour chimes thick o'clock. Outreaching hands, they belong to your dad. He's in all unwashed faces here. You carry his sack of soiled civility. A fool's pride. Just look how precisely all your thin-scabbed privacy. Too easily it leaks. Your paltry cash, your earth-friendly buttons, blue defenselessness, would be more beautiful on a new plasma screen. It'll look just like seawater no one swims in, their own contracting metaphor for long, before it grays what you highlighted blonde. Thought you could change colors? Thought you were built of renewing nouns? So there's another secret. The gray is highlighted. All the secrets come out in the poems. Holy moly. Let's see. I think two more. Count all obvious indentations. This one's really new. Thought there'd still be stick matches, precious in little boxes. Do you remember those? I mean, they were everywhere when I was younger. I loved those. I don't even smoke cigarettes, but I loved those. And then I stopped kind of collecting them, and now I can't find them anywhere except for the expensive restaurants I don't go to. So I hunger for a box of stick matches. So that's how come it's in this poem. I'll start again. thought there'd be stick matches, precious, in their little boxes. You could pick them up almost anywhere for free, and there'd always be something to set fire to. That was sex, when you still had a mom to embarrass. Still thought carrying homemade signs was a form of witness. Now, none of your friends can make their mortgage. Your neighbor's cute little son was convicted of arson. Now she talks to no one, keeps her eyes down. Just like you do, studying this weedy concrete at your feet for some new feeling to have about it, and write out in longhand that just leaves you standing outside the house that belonged to your mother so long ago sold. You couldn't afford that kind of loneliness. Still can't fit meaning inside an image for it. Though you spend a few more hours waiting in front of its door for the no one, which you want to make into everyone listening, and maybe talking back to you from their own poems, from the cracked and weedy concrete that they are staring at. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you. So here we are.
That was lovely.
Thank you.